What's going on, guys? I am already back with another online hat format tournament report for you guys. I know the other one for the Exciton Elimination that took place a little bit earlier had just gone up a few days ago, but the Pleiades Payout 5 has just wrapped up as well, which obviously is another online hat format tournament that takes place through the Hat Alliance Discord server and then is played online. This event wasn't the biggest event, similar to the last Exciton Elimination, and in the video where I kind of reviewed that event, I kind of talked about why the event wasn't as big, and so it's kind of the same situation here. Obviously, we see two back-to-back sort of online hat format tournaments taking place around the same time, and when they kind of overlap like that, it tends to draw in a slightly smaller crowd simply because some people will enter one and not be able to, manage their life outside of Yu-Gi-Oh! Along with multiple online tournaments. Plus, if they're still playing like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And stuff like that as well, that can kind of interfere with this type of stuff too. So it's not that the format is losing any traction or anything like that. It's more so there's just a lot of different events going on, as well as the next Mortal Monthly is starting to come up, so people might be testing more so for that. There's the format library tournament that's going on as well. And so just all these different people are kind of, split between which events they want to go for. So anyways, for this video, I do want to talk about, the breakdown of what decks entered as usual, as well as talking about, any cool tech cards and look at some of those topping deck lists. So anyways, let's get straight into it. So for this event, there was, I believe, just 13 players entered, so I think a couple players less than the Exciton Elimination that was, again, earlier this week. And so for that, though, we do still, just looking at the colors right away on this graph, we do still have a good amount of variance in the decks that actually entered, similar to the last event where we saw just a very colorful graph. It means people are wanting to play other decks and not, all the same deck. So anyways, here we had two Mythic Ruler, surprising already to see that that was one of the more represented decks. Two Geargia, it's expected. Geargia has always been such a dominant deck in hat format, and especially in the past, handful of events, Geargia has made up one of the bigger slices here. Two Artifact Traptrix, again, very similar to Geargia, just a lot of people on it. I don't know if there was any variation, if this was like Hat or Cat or any sort of variation in those cases. We have one Chain Beat, very cool to see that, and I have shown some gameplay from that as well. One Sylvan, one Constellar Artifact, one Fist Artifact Traptrix. I have some gameplay of, the Fire Fist Traptrix deck that eventually I'll show off on the channel, so, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that you see when that video comes out. One Artifact Thunder. This was like the Watt Hunter Artifact deck. I have a lot of gameplay from this deck as well. I don't remember if it's from this exact event or just in general, but be on the lookout for that. One Spellbook and one Madolche. So what we're seeing here, obviously, is unlike the Exciton Elimination, we are seeing, some of the more standard decks popping up. So like the Geargia, the Artifact Traptrix, there's no Infernity, whereas the last time there was, but in this case, there are still, Spellbook. We see Mythic Ruler popping back in. For a while, we hadn't seen Mythic Ruler too much. We saw more so Hieratic Ruler. So really cool to see that that's kind of back around. And yeah, overall, nothing seemed overly dominant. Lots of one-of type decks, which is somewhat expected when there was only 13 entrants. But unlike the Exciton Elimination that had a lot of like weird, obscure decks that people were kind of testing out, this one seems a little more straightforward. We do see some stuff like, Chain Beat isn't as common, or, I guess even, no, some of this is just kind of, what the standard meta, I would almost say, is to an extent. So honestly, overall, very solid graph and stuff. You guys can see all the different decks here. I guess also no one took anything super experimental. There's no slices on here that say other. Usually in the events, there's one or two decks that are considered other, which are just like weird variants of stuff. So we don't see any of that either. So that's kind of interesting. But anyways, let's look at the top breakdown of what decks actually took the top spots. I believe I have the top 4 for you guys. So here we go. In first place, we had Mythic Ruler. So, Mythic Ruler did take a break from the spotlight, but here it is, strong and back as ever. We see Blab getting first place, who actually was the person who piloted the Fabled Raccoon deck in the Exciton Elimination and got second place. So, very solid player here, this time trying it out with a different deck. After that, we see Spellbook getting second. I feel like it's been a while since Spellbook actually took a top spot. Not that they haven't been present in the events, just in general, it feels like maybe they haven't been, placing as highly. So nice to see Spellbook back. After that, we have Arm on Artifact Thunder. He's been really sticking with this deck, so it'll be interesting to see if his list is the same or if there's been any changes to it or anything like that. And lastly here I guess this is third or fourth, as usual, they put third and third. In third or fourth, we have Artifact Traptrix. Again, I don't know if this is Cat or Hat or some other variant, so it'll be cool to see what version of that we have. But anyways, that is the top 4 for this event. Let's get into some of these deck profiles and see what they look like. First off, we do have the first place Mythic Ruler list. Right away, I see that they are on 3 Blue Eyes and 3 Whitestone. A lot of builds will play 2 and 2, so kind of cool to see that. But let me just run through the monsters before I get into the deep conversation of standard versus not standard and everything. But we see 3 Blue Eyes, 1 Flameveil Guard, 1 Blaster, 2 Card Trooper, 1 Debris Dragon, 1 Mythic Tree Dragon, 1 Mythic Water Dragon, Redox Tempest Tidal, 3 Whitestone, and that is it for the monsters. So for some reason, this feels like it's not that many monsters as Mythic Ruler usually plays, but maybe it's just because, looking at some of these ratios, how I mentioned before, that they are choosing to play 3 Blue Eyes and 3 Whitestone, whereas, also only 1 Flameveil Guard. They're choosing 1 Flameveil Guard versus usually a lot of builds will play 2 of this, and again, only 2 Blue Eyes, so I guess they just kind of changed the ratios in the vanillas they chose to play, and as a result, they did want to have the extra Whitestone, which makes the Dragon Shrines and stuff always live, where you can kind of get an extra plus out of them, being able to send, any of your vanillas, usually a Flameveil Guard or something, and then a Whitestone, add a Blue Eyes, and then use it for your trade-ins or anything. And moving on to the spells here, I already do see, they're playing Silver's Cry, which is basically just a quick play reborn for your vanilla dragons, I want to say. So playing 3 Blue Eyes is a little more justifiable when you have something like that. And, obviously being on skill drain that this deck usually is on, having just a 3000 wall kind of is very tough to get over. But for the spells, we see 2 cards of Consonance, 3 copies of Dragon Shrine, 1 Foolish, 1 Gold Sark, 2 Silver's Cry, 3 Soul Charge, 3 Trade-In, and 3 Upstart Goblin. Again, nothing too out of the ordinary other than maybe the 2 Silver's Cry, my bad. And this card, it pops up once in a while, but again, it really isn't the most common, but I do like it as a card, especially, again, going back to that 3 and 3 ratio. This is going to be live more so than not in a lot of cases, and looking at the traps, them playing 3 copies of Wing Blast just gives you more opportunities to actually get some of this stuff in graveyard, so your Silver's Cries feel a little better if you open them with some of these kind of brickier type cards. Seeing that they're on 2 Skill Drain and then 1 Torrential, so a lot of times usually the ratios are switched around a little. Usually it's going to be 3 Skill Drain and 2 Phoenix Wing Wind Blast, so they just kind of swapped it, and already in the side deck I see they are siding the extra Skill Drain. But I think prioritizing in a build like this, the 3 Wing Blast is very nice, and I've said it before with Skill Drain, it's a really good card, but it becomes dead after the first copy just sticks. If your opponent can't out it, your other 2 are kind of just dead. So I do sort of really like seeing that they chose to play 2 over 3, so it's a little less bricky in a sense. So overall, main deck looks pretty cool. They aren't choosing to play Curry Bandit or anything that some builds play, and also they're not maining any hand traps. I know sometimes people for Mythic Ruler like to say that you should be maining like max season stuff to give you more targets for your redox and stuff, but obviously we see that isn't needed, and I do like seeing that. Moving on to the side deck, we see 2 Crow and 2 Max C, so they went with a 2-2 ratio so that they could fit other things. I think that's completely fine. Anyone who's been watching my videos for a long time knows that I really do appreciate and like the 2-2 ratios, so always great to see that. Speaking of 2-2 ratios, they are choosing to play 2 fire and 2 ice hands. This is just an ideal ratio for, a side deck. Seeing that they're not maining any or anything, it makes sense to just play 2 and 2. You want to have a lot of options in your side deck for how vast of a format Hat format is. So, being able to fit this at all is very nice, and playing 2 and 2 is completely fine, like I said, so that you have options of everything else. 1 Flying C, we have seen a lot of decks choosing to play like one-ofs for this card. I think it's really important and necessary, especially combined with, your other hand traps. It gives you just a lot of different variation and options, and usually if you can stick one, you probably can just, win from that position, especially in a deck like this that can put up a ton of damage really quickly, or even stun out the opponent for a turn while you set up, any of your back row or anything else needed. So cool to see that. 1 Wingbeat of Giant Dragon. This is basically just a heavy storm for the opponent by bouncing one of your dragon type monsters to hand. Paired with 3 MST, you're bound to be clearing the back row, especially given you already have Wing Blasts and stuff, though I would assume you might take out some of the stuff to fit these in, obviously. Usually you're siding out traps and stuff, though. I don't know. I feel like Wing Blast is a good enough card going first or second in some cases. Obviously, being a trap, it's a little slower, but still a very good card. 1 Dark Hole makes sense, and then the 3rd Skill Drain. Overall, great side deck as well looking there. So let's move on to the extra deck here. At a quick glance, the extra deck, honestly looks really standard. I don't see anything or ratios or anything that stand out. They're playing the 1 Azure Eyes, 1 Black Rose, 1 Colossal Fighter, 1 Crimson Blader, 1 Scrap Dragon, 1 Star Eater, the 2 copies of Stardust, 1 being Stardust and 1 being Stardust Spark. I always like this. It's just a cool card. They come up in different scenarios, and, it's good to have both. This is very common as well. 1 copy of Felgran, 1 copy of Exciton, 1 copy of Heliopolis, 2 Dracossack, 1 Big Eye, and 1 Giant Grinder. Yeah, very standard, nothing out of the ordinary here. If anything, I'm kind of surprised that they just went with 1 Azure Eyes, given they're on 3 and 3, but even that, only having 1 is usually enough. So honestly, good list. Really cool to see, again, Mythic Ruler back in the spotlight here. So let's move on to the next list. Here we have Spellbook. Already seeing a handful of things I want to talk about. For this list, obviously they are choosing to play 3 Crow. I've said this in the past, some Spellbook decks like to play either Maxis or Crows in the main. And a lot more recently, I'd say that Crow has really been the standout for a lot of Spellbook decks. After that, we have our basic ratios of 3 High Priestess, 3 Justice, 3 Blue Boy. But then here is a little bit of variation. They're choosing to play 2 Temperance, which I would say I wouldn't say it's more common, but the last, couple times I've actually shown off Spellbook, I've seen a lot more players starting to add Temperance, whether that's just because a lot of your cards do require you to have a spellcaster, and this is just a slightly bigger body, as well as being able to pretty much, have a Spellbook or a spellcaster type monster, and then turn it into a High Priestess, that sometimes you don't have the Spellbook spells in hand to actually take advantage of this, but you definitely can engrave. So this being able to turn into your High Priestess and then be able to, pop a card and have a bigger body is very nice. So it's kind of cool to see that as well. For the spells, we see 1 Book of Moon, 3 Crescent, 2 copies of Eternity, 1 Fate, 2 copies of Life. That's a little different. Usually they only play 1. Seeing 2 is interesting. I don't hate it. It's kind of cool, honestly. And, I already see the Cyber Dragons here. I've talked about some cool synergy stuff with that too, but I don't think they're taking advantage of that. So we'll just move past it. 1 copy of Power, 3 copies of Secrets, 2 copies of Wisdom, 2 copies of Master, and 2 copies of Tower. So they aren't choosing to play the pot of dualities or anything. So, I've talked about how sometimes I'm not the most sold on the dualities, though I've kind of been coming around to it a little bit. So kind of funny that now that I'm starting to kind of like it, I'm seeing this deck actually isn't on it. So that's something there. After that, we see 1 copy of Bottomless, 2 Breakthrough Skill, 2 Fiendish Chain, 1 Warning, and 1 Torrential. Interesting. Usually they main the Traptrix Trapple Nightmare if they're going to go for some sort of like monster effect negation, but here we see the breakthrough skills. So that's kind of cool. And also only 2 Fiendish Chain. I know a lot of builds will go with 3. And part of that kind of comes down to the Traptrix Trapple Nightmares. But I guess they also just wanted to prioritize some of these one-of staple type traps, which isn't bad at all. I think it's actually kind of cool to see that in here as well. As for the side deck, we see the 2 Cyber Dragon, which, obviously right underneath it, we see the Chimera techs, and this is definitely just because of Geargia being so prominent in the format recently, as well as a couple of the other machine-type decks. I'm talking about, I think Moral Tech Monthly, the last one, had a gadget deck. So just being able to have this as an easier out for a deck like this, even though I would say Spellbook usually has a decent matchup against Geargia to an extent, mainly because of, things like your Fate, which is just good into a lot of matchups. But this just gives you an extra way to take advantage of that and kind of always scare your Geargia opponent, because this can, in theory, just also summon and run over an armor, though the armor would get a search or something, but then you have this to actually, contact fuse out, which is nice. So cool to see that. 1 copy of Kaiku, the 3 copies of Max C, which, just depending on your matchup, you can always swap out and stuff. 1 copy of Dark Hole, 3 copies of MST, very standard stuff here. 2 copies of Debunk, 1 copy of Soul Drain, and then they are playing the 2 Traptrix Trapple Nightmare, just choosing to play it in the side. So again, overall, I think the biggest thing in the side deck here that we're seeing is just these Cyber Dragons, which again is really cool to see. I almost wish, again, I kind of am glancing here. I almost wish, someone would take a little more advantage of this, because there is the synergies when you are playing Temperance with Life, being able to turn these into level 5s and stuff. Same with like Justice and stuff. And then being able to like special this and then, have Life plays and make, rank 5s would be kind of cool, but it really isn't needed, and it kind of makes your deck a little more susceptible to some of those, cards like Max C that usually, Spellbook isn't really losing to that often or anything. I guess the other thing is you'd have to find a rank 5 that's a spellcaster to make synergies with your cards that require spellcasters, and off the top of my head, I can't really think of too many of that, if any. So that definitely seems like the reason there. Anyways, looking at the extra deck, it doesn't really come up very often, I'm sure. It might, because of the side deck, but seeing 2 Chimera Tech, 1 Daigusto Phoenix, 1 Downerd, 1 Gaia Dragon, 1 Alucard, 1 Succubus, 1 Herald, 1 Hierophant, 1 Leviair, 1 Draco Sack and Big Eye, 1 Nightmare Shark, 1 Heartland Draco, and 1 Shining Elf. I guess I shouldn't say that it never comes up. The extra deck does come up a bit, but it's more so in weird situations, and a lot of it has to do with, just the game state in a weird spot. But for the most part, it doesn't look super unstandard. There's nothing like standing out too much, other than, again, the Chimera text, but that's just because they're choosing to side the Cyber Dragons. But overall, really cool list. I do like seeing the Temperance in the main and stuff, and also the 2 Life is very interesting. But anyways, let's move on to the next list. So next we have Arm's Watt Hunter artifact list. Right away, I'm just kind of glancing over it real quick. It looks basically the same as the last time I covered this deck. I'll go through it real quick, just card by card, but I'm pretty sure at least the main deck looks pretty much the same from what I remember. They are on the 1 Beagle Tack, 3 Moral Tack, and 1 Scythe. that was the same 2 Kagadokage, 2 Ma Hunters as the Hunters. I remember that. Same with the 2 and 2 ratio on the Cobras and Giraffes. I remember that. 2 copies of Max C, 3 Seahorse, 2 copies of Traptrix Mermelio. That might be different. I remember, I think they were on Mermelio. I don't remember it being 2 though. I do like seeing, the 2 of here simply because, seeing this with a Kagadokage is basically just as nice as seeing like a Ma Hunter plus a Kagadokage and like one of your Watts. So that is really nice. Again, I can't remember if they had been on this ratio the last time, and maybe they swapped something out. They have 3 Ignition, 2 Double Cyclone, 2 Instant Fusion, 3 Duality as spells. Maybe I don't remember if they were on Dark Hole. Maybe they swapped like a Dark Hole for one of these, or maybe even a Max C. Maybe they were on 3 Max C the last time, if I'm remembering correctly. Someone will have to let me know in the comment section, or I'll just, check after this video. But I don't remember this being at 2. I feel like they were at least playing 1, but I don't remember 2 there. Anyways, for the traps, we see 3 Sanctum, 1 Bottomless, 3 Call the Haunted, 1 Warning, 1 Torrential, and 1 Traptrix Trapple Nightmare. I've said it before the last time I looked at it. Very clean list, very cool concept, and this is a deck that I want to play around with a bit more because, I had worked on a kind of a variant of, Watt Hunter Artifact or Watt Artifact. But I guess just seeing such a minimalistic package as a whole and mixing all of them so like cleanly together is really refreshing and nice to see. Looking at the side deck, we see the extra copy of Scythe. Arm has done this in the past, and, obviously it's working out for him. We're seeing him consistently topping with this deck. I think he got in the top 4 of some of the recent event. I forget which event exactly it was, but I do remember seeing this. It might have been the Moral Tech Monthly. I can't exactly remember, but seeing that, it makes sense. The 2 copies of Crow, we see the 1 Max C. Interesting now that I think about it, a lot of decks have been on 2 Crow versus the 3 Max C, and that could be because since we're slowly getting out of that more Artifact Traptrix and Geargia exact focus format and moving on to people wanting to play some of the more obscure decks, Max C usually hurts those decks a little more than the control-y decks, so that actually makes sense. And here again, we see the 1 copy of Flying C, just a great addition. Then we have 1 Ragnazero in the side deck. Funny to see that, but I guess in certain matchups it would be good. For example, we saw that Firefist Traptrix deck in the breakdown. I'm sure that's a good deck, or, maybe even Bujins and stuff like that. Here we see 1 Dark Hole, a 3rd copy of Double Cyclone. I feel like I remember, was he maybe on 3 of these the last time? Or maybe he was siding 1 the last time as well. 1 Dimensional Fissure and 1 Mind Control. After that, we see 2 copies of Blackhorn, 1 copy of Breakthrough Skill, and 2 Debunk. So overall, again, pretty solid. We see a lot of things that, whenever we look at an ARM list, we see, for example, the artifacts in the side, a random Xyz or something in the side. Really, really good though. Like I said, the main deck's so cool, and I always like seeing really kind of obscure almost side decks, so nice to see. Looking at the extra deck, we see 1 Mavelus and 1 Ojama Knight, Dweller, Karen Gorgon, Constellar Omega, 1 copy of Pleiades and 1 M7, 1 Diamond Direwolf, 1 Exciton, 1 Cowboy, 1 copy of King of the Feral Imps, 2 copies of 101. We've been seeing this a lot more in a lot of the rank 4 eccentric type decks, 1 copy of Black Ship, and then the 1 copy of Tyrus. Now that I'm thinking about it, I forget. I really don't remember his list all that well, but no Gaia Dragon and no Volcasaurus, which I guess makes sense, because even if you're at the point of having the side Xyz, maybe you just want to prioritize the ones that come up a little more and slightly less on the super situational ones. So I guess that makes sense. And like M7 is super situational, but you have things like Call the Haunted for these, and you're also playing, your other rank 4 Constellar, so you have more options and stuff, but overall, really nice to see. Let's move on to that last list I have for you guys. Lastly, we have the Artifact Traptrix list, which would appear to be a hat list, and right away, the first thing I can notice is just 3 copies of Moral Attack for the artifacts. Right away, whenever I see 3 and that's the only thing, and I can kind of see the dichotomy here, my first thought is this is either Corey McDuffie's list, obviously the person who won the 2014 NAWCQ, or it's a very close variation and they got inspiration from it. So then we see 3 copies of Firehand, 3 copies of Icehand, 2 copies of Maxx C, 2 Dianea, and 3 Mermail, which is Corey McDuffie's monster lineup that he played, because Hat usually doesn't play hand traps in the main as commonly. So seeing that, that instantly makes me think of it, but now I'm kind of glancing down and I see that they are playing the 3rd Maxx C and 3 Crows in the side deck, and Corey wasn't on Crows, and I don't think he was even siding the 3rd Maxx C. I might be forgetting. I had done a whole video on his list, but that was a little while ago, and obviously looking at so many people's lists and stuff, I tend to kind of get a few of them confused. But in general, so far, the monster lineup looks just like that. Also, I'm seeing they're playing 1 Dark Hole and 3 MST over Ignition. I've talked about this in the past. Back in the day, people chose to play MST over Ignition. And if you are choosing to play just 3 artifacts, it makes sense to play MST over Ignition, because you don't want Ignition to take up your spots that Sanctum take up, since, I'll say it again, you need a artifact in deck for Ignition to be able to set in order to activate it. And you don't want to have conflicting, do I use my Sanctum or my Ignition if you, only have, say, 1 artifact left in deck. So seeing that makes a lot of sense. I actually sometimes in certain decks do really like seeing just a small artifact package with the MSTs. Here they are playing the 1 Dichotomy, 3 Duality, and 1 Soul Charge, so pretty nice there. Oh, I guess that's the other thing. Corey had played Upstart Goblin, I believe, and I don't think he was on Fiendish, so maybe that was like a swap out type thing. Anyways, we see 3 copies of Sanctum, 1 Bottomless, 2 copies of Breakthrough Skill, 1 Call the Haunted, Corey was on 1 as well, 1 Compulse, the 3 Fiendish, which I do really like the Fiendish in a deck like this. It's almost reminiscent of a Geargia type list where they play 3 Fiendish and 2 Breakthrough. So really cool to see that. This also stops opposing hands from getting their attacks through, which is nice. 1 copy of Warning, 1 Torrential, and 2 Traptrix, Trap Hole Nightmare. Overall, very clean list. I would want to see this deck kind of more so in action to see how it fully performs versus like modern hat decks and stuff. But cool to see. Looking at the side deck, we see the 3 Crow, 1 Maxx C, 1 Mind Control, 2 copies of Nobleman a Crossout. I really like this card. It's pretty standard to see in general. I guess we haven't seen it in any of the other lists, I don't think, but really cool to see that. 1 Acid Trap Hole, 2 copies of Blackhorn, 2 copies of DNA Surgery, 2 copies of Debunk, and 1 copy of Deep Dark Trap Hole. Usually you do see the 1 and 1 of the extra trap holes here in a lot of decks that are, focused on Mermail to an extent. In general, really clean side deck, honestly. Like, no complaints here. It looks good. For the extra deck, we see 1 Dweller, 1 copy of Durendal, 1 Karen Gorgon, 1 Pleiades, 1 M7, 1 copy of Emerald. I think this card is really important in Hat in general. Just being able to, keep your hands in deck so you can keep, pushing through your opponent's board and stuff is really nice. As well as putting back your artifacts when you're on so few of them. 1 copy of Exciton, 1 Cowboy, 1 copy of Gaia Dragon, 1 101, 1 Ragna Zero, 1 Black Ship, 1 Volcasaurus, 1 Rhapsody and Berserk. I really like this card as well. And 1 Tyrus. So a little different from Corey's list as well. I think Corey had been on, was it Steel Swarm, Rouch, and Lavalval Chain? I think he was on Lavable Chain, and I don't think he was on Emerald. So a little bit of variation as well. So obviously, you know, I'm not saying that they were trying to take Corey's list, but maybe there was some inspiration there with some of these ratios looking so similar. But overall, you know, they placed in third or fourth, so really cool to see that. Really solid list as a whole. Like I said, I would want to see this one a little more in action compared to some of the other lists. Not that I wouldn't want to watch a gameplay of that, it's just compared to other hat lists, this one is slightly different. And again, I talked about that in a different video. But anyways, hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like on it. Comment any questions or videos you want to see in the future. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell to get notified anytime I put a new video out. Be on the lookout for some of these new replays and stuff that I have planned. And make sure to share the videos with your friend. Let me know what you thought of the event in the comment section, and I will see you guys in the next video.